My name is Maya Hollister. I was 31 years old the morning my mother chose my brother's groundbreaking ceremony over the day I passed my professional engineer licensure exam and called me selfish for being upset about it. I was standing in the parking garage of the federal building in downtown Chicago, still holding the paper printout the testing center had handed me, the one with the word pass printed in bold across the top. 8 years of school. 4 years of fieldwork. 2 grueling days of examinations that most engineers fail the first time. My hands were shaking and I wanted to call someone who would scream with me, cry with me, say something that matched the size of the moment. So I called my mother. She picked up on the third ring, her voice already distracted, already somewhere else. Maya, honey, can I call you back? We're getting ready to break ground on the Ashford project. Your brother's got the mayor here, the alderman, the whole development committee. It's a big day. Mom, I said slowly. I passed. I'm a licensed engineer now. There was a pause. In the background, I could hear the clink of champagne glasses, my brother's laugh, the feedback squeal of a portable microphone being tested. Oh, that's wonderful, she said, the warmth already receding like a tide going out. We knew you would. Listen, I'll call you tonight, okay? Your brother worked so hard to get this project, and we really need to be present right now. She hung up before I could say anything else. I stood in that parking garage for a long time. A car pulled past me, then another. Someone's phone played a snippet of a song. I looked down at the paper in my hands and thought about all the Saturday mornings I had spent at the kitchen table doing practice problems while my brother slept until noon and my parents called it being a free spirit. I thought about my father's funeral 3 years earlier, where my mother had pulled me aside and said, "You're the practical one, Maya. We're counting on you." And how, the very next week, she had handed my brother the keys to my father's construction company, Hollister & Sons, even though there was exactly one son, and he had failed his contractor's licensing exam twice. I drove home alone. I ordered a pizza. I put my license printout in a frame I bought at a drugstore and hung it on my apartment wall myself. That night, my mother sent a text that said, "So proud of you. Big day for the whole family," with a photo attached. It was a picture of my brother shaking hands with the mayor in front of a giant Hollister & Sons banner, dirt flying from a ceremonial golden shovel. That was the day I stopped expecting anything from them. But it was not yet the day everything changed. I had been working for 2 years at the Midwest Regional Office of the Federal Housing Finance Agency when the file landed on my desk. My job was part structural analysis, part compliance review. I looked at construction data submitted by developers seeking federal financing for affordable housing projects, and I flagged anything that didn't add up. It was the kind of work that required you to love spreadsheets and distrust round numbers, both of which I did deeply and personally. The file was labeled Ashford Commons Phase 2, a 240 unit affordable housing development on the south side of Chicago. The original phase had been completed 18 months earlier. Phase 2 was seeking federal backing for an additional 180 units targeted at families earning below 60% of the area median income. Families, kids, people who needed a place that would hold. I opened the submittal package on a Tuesday morning with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. The structural specifications looked fine at first glance. Then I pulled up the materials testing certificates, and something snagged at the back of my brain. The compressive strength ratings on the concrete submittals were exactly at code minimum. Not unusual on its own. But the rebar specifications showed a gauge that was technically permissible for the building type, but at the absolute lower threshold. And only when combined with a specific pour schedule and curing protocol. I pulled up the inspection logs. The curing timelines were off. Not dramatically, not in a way that would jump out at a non-engineer, but enough. 3 to 4 days short across multiple pours on the lower floors, which were the floors that carried the greatest load. I cross-referenced the temperature logs from the site for those dates. It had been an unseasonably cold October. Concrete cured in cold conditions without proper protocols can develop microfractures, invisible to the naked eye, that compromise load-bearing capacity over time. I sat back in my chair and rubbed my eyes. Then I looked at the developer name on the file cover sheet. Hollister & Sons Construction, LLC. I read it 3 times. My vision did something strange, like the words were trying to rearrange themselves into something less familiar. I opened the corporate disclosure section of the submittal, and there it was, listed under principal officers. Daniel Hollister, President, my brother. My coffee was fully cold now. I didn't move for a long time. Here is what happens when you're a structural engineer and you find a file like that. Your training takes over before your feelings get a chance to. The training says, pull more data, verify, do not assume, do not catastrophize, but also do not minimize. So I pulled more data. I requested the Phase 1 inspection records through our internal system. When they came back, I spent the better part of 2 days going through them line by line. The same pattern was there, subtler, but there. Materials at the edge of acceptable. Timelines compressed in ways that weren't immediately obvious unless you knew exactly what to look for. Inspection sign-offs from a third-party firm I didn't recognize called Clearview Quality Assurance Group. I ran a search on Clearview. They had been incorporated 14 months ago. They had no other listed clients. Their registered agent address was a UPS store in a suburb 20 minutes from my mother's house. I closed my laptop and sat in the bathroom of my office for 10 minutes with my forehead against the cool tile wall. The building that was already occupied. Phase 1. 120 families had been constructed with materials and timelines that I could not certify as structurally sound without a full independent inspection. That wasn't my opinion. That was what the data said. I want to be honest about what happened next, because I think people assume that when you discover something like this, you immediately know what to do. You don't. You know what you should do. And then you spend a terrible stretch of time arguing with yourself about whether the two things are actually different. I went home that night and I sat at my kitchen table and I thought about my brother. I thought about him at 22, genuinely excited about building things, following my father around job sites with a hard hat 2 sizes too big for his head. I thought about how my father's death had hit him differently than it had hit me, how he had gone quieter and more reckless at the same time, like a car with a stuck accelerator and no one behind the wheel. I thought about my mother, who had spent 30 years pouring everything she had into keeping Hollister and Sons alive, who had told me once that the company was her husband's legacy and she would die before she let it fail. And then I thought about 120 families sleeping in a building that might, over the next 10 or 15 years, begin to show the kind of structural degradation that starts quietly. Hairline cracks, doors that stick, floors that settle unevenly. And then something worse. I picked up my phone. I almost called my mother. I almost called my brother. I put the phone back down. The next morning, I walked into my supervisor's office, closed the door, and laid out everything I had found. I did it calmly, methodically, the way I had been trained to present technical findings, and I disclosed my conflict of interest in the first sentence, before anything else. The developer on this file is my brother's company, I said. I need you to know that before I show you what I found. My supervisor, a quiet man named Richard, who had been in federal housing compliance for 22 years, looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Show me." I showed him. He asked 4 questions. Then he said, "I'm going to need you to step back from this file, and I'm going to need to make some calls." I stepped back. The calls were made. I went home, and I sat with what I had done. It didn't feel like betrayal. It felt like the opposite, like I had finally refused to betray the people who would live in those buildings. But knowing what it was didn't make the hours that followed any easier. I did not call my brother or my mother, not because I didn't want to give them the chance to respond, but because I understood by then that warning them would not result in my family doing the right thing. It would result in my family calling lawyers and destroying records and constructing a story in which I was the villain. I had seen my brother operate. I had watched him smile his way out of every contractor conflict, every delayed timeline, every unhappy subcontractor, his entire career. He was very good at it. What I did instead was contact a whistleblower protection attorney named Susan Park, who had been recommended by a colleague at a conference 2 years earlier in a conversation I had filed away in my brain under probably never need this. I needed it. Susan walked me through my rights under the False Claims Act, which covers exactly this situation, a federal contractor submitting fraudulent certifications to obtain government-backed financing. She explained that if the investigation substantiated my findings, I would be protected from retaliation, and that I would be eligible for a portion of any damages recovered by the government. "How certain are you about the engineering conclusions?" she asked. "Certain enough that I'd stake my license on it," I said. "Which is exactly what I'm doing." She nodded slowly. "Then let's make sure you're protected while you do." I went back to work. I answered the investigators' questions. I prepared technical summaries that translated the engineering data into language that regulators and attorneys could use. I did my job. It was, in a strange way, the most clearly I had ever understood why I had chosen this job. My brother called me on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after I had reported my findings. He led with charm, which is always how he leads. "Hey, stranger. Mom says you've been quiet. Everything okay?" "Everything's fine," I said. "Listen," he said, his voice shifting into the register he used when he wanted something, lower, more confiding, like we were co-conspirators. "I heard there might be some questions coming up about the Ashford project, some compliance review thing. I just want to make sure there's no confusion, given that we're family, and you work in that world. If anyone asks you anything, I'd love to just—" "I've already answered every question that's been asked of me," I said. There was a silence. "What does that mean?" "It means I did my job." He didn't call back that night. My mother called the next morning, her voice careful in the way it only got when she already knew something and was deciding how much to pretend she didn't. "Maya, your brother says there's some kind of review happening. He's worried. He says it came from inside your office." "Mom, I can't discuss an active compliance matter." "Maya," her voice tightened. "He's your brother. This is your father's company. Do you understand what could happen if—" "I understand exactly what could happen," I said quietly. "I understood it when I was looking at curing logs from a building where families live. I understood it when I found out the inspection firm certifying the work didn't exist before your company needed it certified." The silence on her end was long enough that I heard her breathing change. "Those are very serious accusations," she finally said. "Yes," I said. "They are." She hung up. I made myself a cup of tea and stood at my kitchen window and watched the street below for a while. A woman was walking a dog. 2 kids were arguing over a bicycle. Life doing what life does, indifferent to my family's choices and the consequences approaching them, like whether they had refused to check the forecast for. The investigation moved deliberately, the way these things do when they're done properly. The State Department of Buildings issued an order requiring independent structural assessment of Phase 1 of Ashford Commons while the federal review proceeded. An engineering firm with no prior relationship to Hollister & Sons conducted core sample testing, load capacity analysis, and a full review of the construction documentation. Their report confirmed what my data had suggested. The lower floor structural elements in several buildings showed measurable deficiencies in compressive strength, consistent with inadequate curing under cold conditions. No imminent collapse risk, I want to be precise about that, because I know how it sounds, but significant long-term durability concerns that would require remediation work on an accelerated timeline. The kind of problems that, left unaddressed, become catastrophic in 15 years instead of 5, which is exactly why they're so dangerous. By the time the building shows it, everyone who made the decision has moved on. The city ordered remediation. The federal financing for Phase 2 was denied pending resolution of the Phase 1 findings. Clearview Quality Assurance Group, the inspection firm my brother had been using, was referred to the State Attorney General's office for investigation into potential fraud. My brother's response was what I had known it would be. He gave an interview to a local business publication in which he said that his company was the victim of a politically motivated compliance process and that he had full confidence the facts would vindicate them. He posted on his professional social media about bureaucratic overreach targeting small family businesses. His supporters in the comments called it exactly that. Some of them knew my name. Some of the comments mentioned me specifically. My mother stopped calling. My aunt sent me a lengthy text that used the phrase, "You always were too ambitious for your own good," and another one that said your father would be heartbroken. I read them once and put my phone face down on the counter. There was a morning, somewhere in the middle of all of it, when I woke up at 4 a.m. and lay in the dark and asked myself the question I had been trying not to ask. Was I sure I had done the right thing? Not legally, Not professionally, I was certain about those. But in the deepest sense. Sure that the pain I was causing was proportional to the protection I was providing. And then I thought about the families in those buildings. The woman I had never met who put her kids to bed in an apartment she had worked for years to qualify for because the affordable housing waitlist in Chicago is 6 years long in some neighborhoods. The man who had finally gotten his family out of a basement unit with mold problems and into something he could be proud of. They had trusted that someone checked the work. They had every right to that trust. Withholding what I knew would have been a choice to take that trust and throw it away for the sake of keeping peace at Christmas dinner. I got up, made coffee, and went to work. The False Claims Act settlement came through 8 months after I filed my initial report. Hollister and Sons agreed to pay back the federal financing they had already drawn for Phase 1, plus substantial civil penalties, and to fund a portion of the remediation costs for the affected buildings. The total figure was significant enough that my share of it, as the original disclosing party, landed in my bank account on a Wednesday morning while I was eating breakfast and nearly made me drop my fork. I did not buy a car. I did not take an elaborate vacation. I thought for a long time about what to do with money that had come from this particular source from my father's company, from the business that had meant everything to my family and nothing to its residents, and I finally did something that surprised even me. I contacted the Chicago Community Trust and proposed a fund. I called it the Foundation Standard, a name I chose deliberately. After the technical term for the baseline structural requirements every building must meet before it can house a single human being. The fund provided resources for 2 things: pro bono structural engineering assessments for affordable housing developments whose residents or community organizations had concerns about building safety, and legal support for construction workers who wanted to report unsafe practices but were afraid of losing their jobs. The launch press release described me as a federal compliance engineer and whistleblower. A reporter from a local NPR affiliate asked if I wanted to discuss my personal connection to the case. I said yes. I told the story plainly and without decoration. I said that my brother's company had built the buildings in question, that I had reported my findings through proper channels, and that the most important thing I wanted people to understand was that the workers who had been on those job sites had known something was wrong too. Some of them had said so to supervisors and been told to keep the line moving. Those were the people the fund was for. My brother's attorney sent me a letter. My mother left a voicemail that lasted 4 minutes and that I still have not listened to all the way through. I got to the part where her voice broke, and I stopped the recording. She wrote me a letter eventually, the old-fashioned way, on the pale blue stationery she has used my whole life. In it, she said that my brother had lost the company, that they had sold the equipment and the yard and 2 trucks at auction, that he was working for a commercial roofing outfit now and barely speaking to anyone. She said she had not been sleeping well. She said she understood, on some level, that what I had found was real, because she had known, on some level, that your brother cuts corners. He always has. Your father used to say he had to watch him, and I should have watched him better after your father was gone. Then she said, "Maybe I should have come to your exam. I'm sorry we weren't there." I read that sentence 10 times. I sat with it for a week. It was not everything I had ever needed from her. It was not close to everything. But it was something true, and in my family, true had always been the rarest currency. I wrote back. I told her I was not interested in performing forgiveness I didn't feel yet. I told her I was open to conversations that started with honesty about what had happened and what it had cost, not just the money and the contracts, but the families who had to live through inspections and remediation and uncertainty in their own homes. I told her that door was not closed, but it wasn't wide open either. I told her I loved her in the way that you love people who are also the source of your oldest wounds, which is a complicated and particular kind of love that I had finally stopped apologizing for. She wrote back 2 weeks later. We have been writing letters since then. It is slow. It is not easy. Some of her letters make me want to throw them across the room. Some of mine probably do the same to her. But we are writing them. My brother has not contacted me. I have thought about what I would say if he did, and I am honestly not sure. That's the truth I can give you right now. Not a resolution. Just an open question I am living alongside. What I am sure of is this. I am a licensed structural engineer. I spent 8 years becoming one. And I did it without a single Hollister and Sons job on my resume, without a family company to walk into, without anyone handing me a golden shovel at a groundbreaking while a mayor shook my hand. I did it in testing rooms and field sites, and late nights in a one-bedroom apartment with my textbooks stacked next to a cold cup of coffee. And the license I carry says that when I sign my name to a set of documents, the public can trust that I have told them the truth about whether a structure is safe. That is not a credential. That is a promise. And I have never once considered breaking it. Not for comfort, not for loyalty, and not for the particular slow poison of keeping peace with people who had decided a long time ago that my peace was a lesser priority than their ambitions. If you are listening to this and you work in a field where your professional judgment is the only thing standing between the public and someone else's shortcuts, I need you to hear something. The people who benefit from your silence will never call it silence. They will call it loyalty. They will call it family. They will call it not making a big deal out of nothing, not being dramatic, not throwing everything away over a technicality. Here is what I call it: a choice. Every time you look at data you don't like and decide not to follow it because the name on the file is familiar, that is a choice. And the people living in the buildings, riding in the cars, taking the medications that result from that choice did not get to make it with you. I am not telling you the choice is easy. I am telling you it is clear. My name is Maya Hollister. I am a licensed professional engineer in the state of Illinois. When I walked out of that testing center 8 years ago with a printout that said "Pass" in bold letters and called my mother and heard the sound of a party I wasn't invited to, I could not have told you that the piece of paper I was holding was eventually going to protect 120 families from a building they shouldn't have had to worry about. But that is exactly what it did. Now I want to hear from you. If you found out a family member's business was cutting dangerous corners, would you report it or try to handle it quietly? And have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and protecting someone who is being harmed by them? Tell me in the comments. I read every one.